Greetings, dear friends. Podcast of the International Club of People's Unity. Program Face to Face with Alexander Kazakov. Alexander Kazakov is myself. As a guest, I have today American journalist Christopher Helali. Christopher, greetings.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Christopher, I would like today to discuss a very popular topic, not to say the least, the war in the East, and under a certain corner, under a certain angle. Look, practically in the first day, right away, different from the conflict of the last year, right? At the first day, we had an opposition, and other countries were involved in this opposition, and not just the countries of the Persian Gulf. Second day, this conflict entered Hezbollah. They promised that if Ayatollah Khamenei will die, we will enter the fight. So they did. Together with them, the whole Lebanon was involved. And so we see the picture that day by day, step by step, we have international conflict. And knowing the history of the Eastern wars, if you don't stop in time or on time, then the involvement of new players can be continued. And then it would be a huge regional conflict, a huge regional war. And Iran is ready for that. That's obvious. Because for Iran, this is a type of a defensive strategy. They are pressuring the allies of the United States. It's clearly some kind of defensive strategy. And if that doesn't stop, then we will get what we will read in the textbooks, Eastern conflict, where you will see no end to it. So, in connection with this, I would like to find out your opinion. How great is the danger of spreading this conflict? And which are other regional players can be involved?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Of course, this is an important topic, and also for me personally, as an Iranian dual citizen. My father is from Iran. My family members are in Iran now. So it's a very important topic. It's a very timely one, and also very near to so many hearts around the world who have connections to Iran, a country of nearly 90 million people. Now, this is the fourth time there has been a war between specifically Israel and Iran, and now more broadly, as you rightfully point out, many other nations involved in this conflict now. In the first true promise and the second true promise, it mostly was confined to Iran, Israel, with the participation of Yemen, give or take. In the third round, last summer, the Americans got involved. And now in the fourth round, which is now a much more prolonged war, which has led to the killing of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, led to the killing of a lot of the top military staff, politicians. Today, there was an attack on the Assembly of Experts during voting. So we're seeing now a widening of the conflict. Now, Iran has retaliated against U.S. interests in the Gulf states, but also as far as Cyprus, where they targeted, the Hezbollah, which is now coming to the defense of Iran, has targeted Akrotiri, which is the British base on Cyprus. So this has become a much more regional situation at this point. And the problem is that many of us have predicted this could be the beginning of a regional war that could lead to a possible world war if tensions are not kept down and diplomacy doesn't take hold in the region. At this point, there seems to be no sign of a diplomatic exit. So what we are seeing is a slow escalation in the asymmetric warfare on the battlefield. So in the beginning, there was a massive strike by the Israelis and the United States, a combined effort. Within the first 24 to 36 hours, almost 2,400 bombs were dropped. About 1,400 by the Israelis, 1,000 from the Americans. In that time, we had casualties in the about 550 or so dead and thousands more wounded on the Iranian side. The Israelis and the Americans were able to target anti-aircraft, ballistic missile sites, of course, military headquarters, military and police buildings around the country. And they've continued to do that, targeting tunnels, targeting nuclear sites, whatever they can get their hands on. However, Iran has a policy that allows for a decentralized military to operate effectively. So this was a tactic learned at the time of the Iran-Iraq war, but this is something that will eventually, I think, give Iran the upper hand. Even if you kill all the generals, even if you kill all of the field officers, the military can still function effectively at the base level, at the squad level, at the platoon level, because those small groups, those commanders have authority to do whatever they need to inflict casualties and to inflict damage on the enemy. And that includes at sea, by air, and on land. And it is not only confined to Iran and its border areas, it can be anywhere. So my fear is that right now the Americans and the Israelis have opened Pandora's box. They've turned the supreme leader into a martyr, which for Shia Islam is the highest honor. So now they've created a rally around the flag effect, where people who might have been critical of the government, and there are people who are critical of the government, have said, look, we Iranians can deal with our government, but we will never allow a foreign government to come and to dictate terms to us. Iran is a very proud country. It's a civilization, 5,000 to 6,000 years old. So it's not going to tolerate outsiders. And outsiders have come to try to dictate terms and have always met fierce resistance. So that's very important to understand here. It looks like the Americans also are feeling the pressure because the Gulf states are putting tremendous pressure on the Americans to try to find a way out of this. It's doing damage to the economy in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, and Kuwait. This has a big impact on the region. It has a big economic impact. And of course, that key is the Strait of Hormuz. The Yemenis, Ansar Allah has already said that they would close the Bab al-Mandab. So the Red Sea is already a target for them. But now the Iranians have said that the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. And there's been mixed reporting. But in any case, the Iranians have the capacity. They don't need big ships to do it. All you need is a couple of small boats like the Yemenis have taught us to go next to a ship and take it over or place a bomb and sink it. So, and not to mention, Iran now has a plethora of drone technology. It has drones everywhere. And we know this because some of these drones have already seen service in other battlefields. So these drones are flying everywhere and nobody knows how to deal with it. Even basically asking for Ukrainians to come and to help them to figure out how to down some of these drones. So the Americans and the Israelis have dealt a serious blow to Iran. That does not mean that they've won anything. They have taken out the leadership. But actually to win this would require not only boots on the ground, but nation building again. And we saw in history that nation building has failed for the Americans in Afghanistan, in Iraq, partially in Syria, we can say, because it is still a fractured state. In Libya, for sure, it is basically two small governments and an area outside of the government's control, outside of Benghazi and Tripoli. So seen in the world today where nation building has worked effectively. So in this case, the Americans and the Israelis are on the losing side of the equation. And the only way that they could do this is to put boots on the ground and to effectively try to install a regime from outside. Because at this point, the Iranians are not rising up to overthrow their government. In fact, the opposite is happening. And I would add, they are now trying to rely on proxies, sectarian and separatist proxies, Kurds, Baluchis, Arabs and Ahvaz, Azeris not so much yet, but definitely the Kurds are the main source of the tension now in Iraq, the separatists, KDPI, Komale, Pejak. They're trying to unite the Kurds and try to use them as a fifth column to go back into Iran and at least to try to gain a foothold in some territory by which they can either establish terms with the central government or a beachhead for them to invade from. But Iran is a mountainous country. So even if they do take a part of the country, they'll not take the whole country, and they won't do it effectively. Even if they do it, they won't be able to hold it, because the tactics we saw in Iraq are easily transferable to Iran. And so you're going to have soldiers again getting blown up in convoys with IEDs, V-beds, you name it. So for me, I think that the Trump administration might have been under the false idea, and this might have been from the Israelis, that if they get rid of the supreme leader, somehow everybody would rise up and give flowers to Americans and Israelis, thanking them for ridding them of this oppressive, totalitarian theocracy, whatever they say. But in fact, the opposite has happened. And we've predicted that from the beginning. It's not a secret that this has happened in this way. We knew that. Us experts who study the region and who have links to the region, we knew this. But the Americans thought that they could go in there in 24 to 48 hours or 72 hours and topple the government, and then the Shah would come back or some democratic government would take hold. That's not the case. There is no unified opposition at this point. There are fractured opposition, whether it's Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, the Mujahideen Khalq, the terrorist organization of Maryam Rajavi, which is based in Albania, and then all of the other separatist groups that are out there. There's nobody else at this point as an alternative, as an opposition figure. So this short-sightedness, I think, will be the unraveling of this project, and I think will lead to the downfall of Trump's administration, at least in the way that the Americans see it, because they were promised no new wars. They were promised America first. And now you see on social media, you see everywhere in the political commentary, both right and left uniting and saying, look, this is an Israel first policy. This isn't in the interests of Americans, and why are Americans dying? So that's, I think, the state of affairs today.
Christopher, you kind of pre-spoke about my next question. Let's talk in a concrete back to the internal state of Iran, because recently there have been news today from Washington that Trump is already speaking to leaders of Kurds, and you have named main religious ethnical groups, but really they're not religious, they're all Muslims. Basic ethnical groups, these are Kurds, Azerbaijan, Arabs, Baluchi. We'll talk about Kurds separately. And you're right, they do something alike on the Iraq's campaign when they created Iraqi Kurdistan. But, and again, you're right, that Iraqi Kurdistan did not win. It didn't help them to win. It's just they took what they wanted on their own and they got separated. So, placing a bet on the ethnical minorities, that's not a way to victory. But you know what, I'm myself interested in this time comparing to the summer campaign are a totally different behavior from Azerbaijan. We know that during the summer campaign, Azerbaijan has provided its own territory, and Tehran officially stated that drones and Israeli planes, especially drones, were flying on the territory of Iran from Azerbaijan. This time, Azerbaijan took publicly neutral position, meaning that our airspace is not taken by anybody, and in a neutral position, in a gesture of goodwill, they opened up the border for Russian citizens that wanted to leave the territory. Do you think it's connected with some kind of changes, with something, the position of Azerbaijan and Mr. Aliyev? In the 6 months, some work was done?
I think the reason is a strategic one for his administration, for his regime, we could say, because Iran has the capability, arsenal, to take out Azerbaijan's most important and precious resource, which is its oil production. So if Azerbaijan becomes a hostile state, it's very easy for Iran to take it out of commission. That economic consequence could lead to the downfall of Aliyev's government. It could lead to a complete regime change internally by domestic actors. So I think that there was a calculus that it's better to stay neutral in this case and let the Israelis and the Americans and the Iranians duke it out than to then put Azerbaijan in the middle of it and for Azerbaijan to then be hit. Don't forget that Azerbaijan has been experiencing the tension by vis-a-vis Ukraine with some of their investments and oil that's going there. This has been a source of enormous contention between Azerbaijan and the Russian Federation as well over Ukraine. And we've seen Aliyev also be more pro-Ukrainian in some of his stances and speaking more about the conflict in a way that is much more aligned with the Western objectives. And I think that recognizing that he is bordering a country that has a larger Azeri population than Azerbaijan, and I think that he had to then take the calculus and say it's not in the interest of Azerbaijan to get involved and to risk political, economic, and social instability in a country that already is vulnerable in the Caucasus and is vulnerable as sort of an in-between country between three major countries, really. If you think about it, Turkey, Iran, and the Russian Federation, they basically surround Azerbaijan, and each of them has a play in Azerbaijan. Azeris are Shia Muslims, so there's a connection. Azerbaijan was a part of the Russian Empire and then of the Soviet Union, so there's a connection to Russia, of course. And then they are Turks by ethnicity and language, so they have a connection to Turkey, at least in the pan-Turkic sense. So I think all of this has a lot to do with Aliyev's calculation about the fact that he was in a vulnerable place and he didn't want to jeopardize Azerbaijan's position moving forward after the dust settles.
Okay, good. Then let's get back to Kurds, as we discussed previously. How strong are the expectations of Americans, first of all, Americans, that they would work out the ground proxy powers represented by Kurds? Are there any signs? Because, I'm not a specialist on Iran. I don't deal with Iran. I don't study Iran, but nevertheless, I do watch Iran for the last years. Honestly, I have not heard the news that are saying about some kind of wild Kurd opposition and separatism. I've seen the story about Belgium, but I haven't heard stories about Kurds. Do you think there are perspectives with Americans to warm up Kurds on operation on the ground?
So in this case, I think I'm a good person to talk to because I am an Iranian Kurd myself. So my father is half Kurdish, half Lor. So that's my ancestry as well. And Lors are considered by some Kurds as Kurdish and by others as separate. So it depends on who you ask for our even minority within a minority. But for Iranian Kurds, there's a unique aspect. Kurds are divided, as you know, between four major states and a minor state, what was called Red Kurdistan, which was part of Armenia in the sort of Nakhchivan area, Armenia, Azerbaijan, that area in the Caucasus. And that was actually part of Soviet Union, and the Soviets had a perspective about Kurdish self-determination. There was a Soviet-supported newspaper in the Kurdish language, and also there was, for a brief time, the only ever Kurdish state, which was given by Stalin, basically, under Stalin's support, which was the Republic of Mahabad in Mahabad, Iran today. And that lasted for about a year until the Soviets and the British decided to mutually withdraw from Iran and allow the Shah of Iran at that time, the son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to take control. And he ended up killing Qazi Muhammad, and the rest is history. But the Kurds divided between Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran have differences. They're not united necessarily. They're united in a Kurdish identity, which has been created as part of a nationalist discourse. Their languages are somewhat different, Kurmanji, Sorani, Zazaki. So they are mutually intelligible up to a range, 60%, 80%, 90%. So that's important. Also, there's religious differences. Most Kurds are Sunni. In Iran, there's a difference between the Kurds because there are Sunni Kurds and Shia Kurds, like my family. There's also Alehak or Yarsan Kurds, who are closer to Shia Kurds, but they also have a difference. So in this sense, there's no unifying to Kurdish nationalism. Kurds in Iran have been the least separatist of the Kurds historically. Certainly they have fought, and that was part of the Soviet. We remember that after the Soviet Union was created, there was this conference in the Caucasus, in Baku, I believe it was, the Toilers of the East. And there was this idea that there would be a push to liberating the people in Central Asia and in the Middle East. That was part of the impetus for some of the ethnic separatist movements that occurred, the national liberation movements in Iran, especially. There were movements in like Gulistan, in Kurdistan, and others that were inspired by the Marxist-Leninist ideology. But the main impetus then migrated to the PUK. So these two groups had also fighting amongst each other because we have some very big differences. And in this sense, the biggest difference is that Iranian Kurds, because Kurds, depending on who you ask, but most experts and academics will agree, Kurds are part of the Iranian nation historically. They are part of the Iranic peoples, right? They're not Arabs, but they are Iranic peoples, of which Persians, Kurds, Lurs are all members of that. So Kurds in Iran feel a kinship with Iran and Persians that Kurds in Turkey do not feel to Turks, and Kurds in Syria and Iraq don't feel to Arabs. So there's a difference there. And don't forget that the Kurds were in the Iranian part were under the Safavid dynasty. They were under the different dynastic heritage than the Ottomans. So that also led to fighting amongst one another. So I think that with this, we can come to the present day and we see that certainly there is an opposition, but the opposition is in the minority. And most Kurds just want their rights to language, their rights to enjoy their cultural heritage, and more or less they are granted that. You can even see videos every Nowruz, women even without the headscarf in Kermanshah, in a lot of the other major Kurdish cities, they are dancing and singing and nobody's bothering them in the mountains. The main thing is that separatism is not allowed. So a separatist ideology and a separatist drive is forbidden, of course, because it violates the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic. So we have groups like Komale, like KDPI, like PEJAK, some of whom are aligned much more on the left wing, like Marxist-Leninist or former communists that are now some level of socialist. Or you have more nationalist right-wing movements that want to openly align with America and with Israel. Other to unite their forces. And certainly there are probably about 1,000 plus fighters. They could do significant damage, and there has been fighting before in the Kurdistan region, but it has been low intensity. It has not been the insurgency that we've seen of the PKK, for example, in Turkey, that led to the tens of thousands killed and helicopters getting shut down and things like that. In Iran, there has also been an uneven relationship because Iran vis-a-vis Turkey are also antagonistic to each other. So some of the Iranian Kurds have been supported with weapons and training and intelligence to fight against Turkey, which is a very interesting thing that has happened in history, especially from the PKK side. So all of that to say, there will certainly be a push, and we heard this from John Bolton and others, that they have already provided weaponry and training and intelligence to the Kurds, especially in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, which is semi-autonomous. They've provided them there. They have bases there. They have ammo storage there and weapons depots, and they have personnel. They could bring people over the border and start fighting. But will they take major cities? I am not so sure at this point. I doubt it, because Kurds in Iran look to Iraq and look to Syria and seen what has happened there to the Kurds there. And I fought with the Kurds in Syria for almost a year in the YPG and worked with Russian forces, with Wagner at the time, and with Syrian Arab Army in the fight against Daesh. So I saw firsthand within the contradictions of the Kurdish liberation movement. The people who wanted to support the United States and the opposition, those who were much more nationalist, those who favored autonomy, and there was no consensus. And now you see the result of no consensus. Jolani or al-Shara has full power now, and the Kurds have basically disappeared from the equation in the northeast. Almost overnight, they lost that massive force that they had, and they folded under intense pressure. So Kurds in Iran look to that and say, are we going to sacrifice our lives, our well-being to come into a similar situation? And don't forget, Kurds in Iran have an understanding of what the Americans and the West did to Kurds in Halabja vis-a-vis Saddam Hussein when they provided chemical weapons. So they're not necessarily as openly pro-American as one might think, because they have seen that the Americans were the ones who provided Saddam with the capabilities to be belligerent against Iranians and especially Kurds as a minority, and killed many tens of thousands, if not more. So all that to say that the Kurds, of course, this will be a major operation to try to use the Kurds as a force, as a proxy force to try to carve out territory. And I think they will also use jihadist forces, the ISIS prisoners that have been released, all of these different groups that are running around Syria. They're going to bring those in as well into the equation. But Iran as a country has a unique identity and a unique national history. And I think that it will not be as successful. They might be able to carve out some territory, but they will not overall be able to carve out all of the Kurdish territory that they have desired and that we've seen of maps of on social media.